Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session on internationalising your website. My name's Anne White. I'm head of international trade at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. So we have a large team here who will help you in all aspects of trading internationally, from market promotion, looking at new expansion into markets, as well as the technical trade facilitation side of things. As you've already heard, today's session is being recorded. It may be made available later on the thamesvalleychamber.co.uk website in the events webinar library. But as I said, if you wish to look at it again, you'd be able to. If you have questions, I either put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And what we'll probably do today, because it's quite a small session, is maybe allow you to actually then ask your question, because we want to try and make it as interactive as possible and to make sure that it actually gives you the information that you need. So, welcome to everyone. As we know, today's webinar, over the past few years, the way we're doing business has changed significantly. By embracing digital tools and building strong online presence, companies are more likely to sustain business longer and achieve growth rates not achievable by working solely offline. Companies' websites are the gateway to their business, allowing your company to increase international visibility, attract new leads and customers, as well as facilitate consumer research into your products and services. When looking to increase export revenue, a well-constructed and internationalized site is fundamental to build relationships with both potential clients and online search engines. But when you look to internationalize your company's website, where do you start? Well, this is a good place to start. And I know some of you already have international websites that are pretty good, but this is a good place to start. And I've done a few of these with Claire, and I've never not picked up something new every single time, because she's up with the latest developments and the latest tips and tricks. So our expert, and I call her an expert because she is today, is Claire Snowdon. She's an experienced international business growth and international communication specialist, and she works with organizations, helping them to work efficiently across culture, increase exports to existing and new overseas locations. She has 30 years of international manufacturing and operational leadership with extensive business and cultural expertise, having lived in and worked in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and the Far East. She has a proven track record in business growth, cost, cycle time reduction, and building motivated cross-functional teams, having worked on multi-million-dollar programs in both the UK and the US textiles and apparel manufacturing sector. She is also a certified intercultural trainer and an accredited export communications consultant. So without further ado, over to Claire. I'm going to stop my screen and let you share, Claire.
Okay, great. So let's make the technology work. It's great when it works. Let's have a look. So I'm hoping that is now showing on the screen. And if you can just confirm that that's all ready to go.
It is showing, but we have it in presenter view. So we have your...
You have it in presenter view?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Which typically didn't happen earlier.
Yeah, of course it didn't. Yeah, so let me just try that again. How about now?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, great. So I am just going to shut off my video, and don't know whether you want to keep yours off as well. So I will shut off my video when I'm going through the presentation, just so you can focus on the screen. But as Anne said, I'd like to welcome you today. And we do actually have a number of people on the session, and because as Anne said, we've got a smaller number today, which in some ways we're quite excited about, because it perhaps will make it more interactive, and you can actually get to the hub of some of the questions that might have prompted you to join today's session. So I'd like to welcome, I'm going to say by name. So obviously my name's Claire Snowdon, but I'd like to welcome Priscilla, Zoe, Julian and Ian to the live session today. We do know that we get a lot of people that do watch the webinar on recording I think a lot of people sometimes like to choose their times of viewing. And today we are very happy to have you with us on the live session. So Anna sort of set the scene. And what I'm going to do is, because I've had a look at a number of your websites and online presence already, I am going to perhaps spin through some of the things more quickly, and areas where I think it might be of more value, do perhaps a deeper dive. But really important for you to bring those burning questions. Perhaps you had a reason why you came along today's session. Maybe it's just a refresher, or maybe you have a specific question, which I will try to answer. If you bring that to our attention through the chat or the Q&A, and failing that, if I can't answer it, I'll come back to you. And failing that, I will do the research if I don't know the answer, and come back to you accordingly. So I'm just going to turn my camera off so you can concentrate on the slides. So of course, the focus of today's session is key steps to internationalizing your online presence, with a particular focus into the website. But I suspect some of you may have some questions around other areas of online presence, so that would be perfectly acceptable. These are the steps that you can take, and that's what I'm going to share with you today, the key steps, or the 6 steps to internationalizing your online presence, in particular your website. Steps that you can take to make it more effective for your chosen international markets or market. A website highlights your willingness and ability to trade with your overseas clients, of course, and any partners that you might have. And by undertaking research and evaluating your online presence, your company can increase revenue from international sales, perhaps test new markets, and also understand what appeals to your target market and how to cater it. And it's interesting to note that everyone on today's session is actually representing a product company. So you've got something to sell. So there's potentially a product that you're wanting to present online to potential customers, perhaps people researching your product, or perhaps looking for partners, in addition to the fact that you may have an e-commerce part to your website or not. Sometimes is the case with product, and sometimes isn't, dependent upon the complexity and type of product that you have. So the website sits at the heart of your online presence, and it's important to understand that you make sure that you understand that your customers can understand the benefits of your product, or I'm going to refer to product all the time because I normally do refer to service as well, but I'll just use the word product, and you can interchange that if you have something that applies to a service. So the benefits need to be clear to the customer. What are your USPs? As your website sits there to attract customers, initiate a call to action, I would suggest, and potentially in some cases replace that personal sort of contact if the location is far from where your office or your buildings or your product is located. So we are going to look at the 6 key steps, and hopefully that'll give you a bit of a pathway. Some of it might be a refresher for you, and some of it might be new thinking, or might be something you haven't thought of before. So I normally start by just confirming why is it good to go international, but I think I most probably don't have to labor this point, because pretty much everyone on the call has shown their international credentials in terms of their websites, and also the types of products and the types of locations that their businesses are doing business in. So this is almost like preaching to the converted, but these are the reasons that I share with some people. And there are many companies that question whether international, many UK companies question whether international is good for business. So here's some stats of why. They're there for you to read. I won't bother going through them. And also you do get a copy of the presentation. So if you did want to perhaps confirm to your own organization why it's good for your business, or perhaps you're trying to sell the idea to somebody externally or internally, perhaps some of these stats might be helpful. There's also some reasons to confirm why it's good to be online. And again, I think pretty much everyone on today's call is kind of got that message, and you're out there and doing great stuff online. Just to understand that, the internet growth is ever growing, ever changing. And here's some stats to confirm, where the growth is. So this might confirm some of the locations that you're currently doing business in. So Asia having the most internet users, followed by Europe and then Africa and so on. Another reason maybe to look at particular markets in terms of your online presence. And finally, the top 20 internet countries. This stat's quite old. It's just because the current 2022 stats or even 2021 stats aren't out there yet, but this gives still a good flavor of the top countries: China, India, US, Indonesia, Brazil. It's quite interesting, you know, where we sit or don't sit as a country on the internet usage. So again, another reason why it might be a good idea, particularly if you've got customers you're trying to attract or customers you work with in these locations, really good idea to have a form of online presence that is talking to them. And I do talk about online presence in relationship to also, you know, the equivalent of your storefront. You know, if in the old days you would have perhaps had a store, you would have opened up a location for people to come and see you in passing in the high street, so to speak. But obviously we've moved forward now in terms of requiring an online presence so that we can have that global presence and we can sell potentially and connect with customers and consumers around the globe. So when it comes to selling online, I suppose step one is to really be clear on your international online focus. You know, where is it you're looking to sell online, and what countries are important to you? Just lost my place a little bit, excuse me. So if you've not done this already, you've not considered which countries, which locations, which I think is not necessarily the case because some of your businesses, as I say, are quite mature. But if you haven't, then here's some quick 5 things that you can do to consider developing or clarifying an export strategy. Really important if you're going to have online presence, going to be looking at your communication strategy, what's the plan of action for marketing, etc. Then you need to have your export strategy. So where are we going to be selling or promoting ourselves? So number one, pick a market or a location where you already have experience or somebody in your team has experience. Number two, look at in-house language skills. You might have some that you're not aware of. Sometimes they're hidden within your workforce if you have a workforce. Look back at past service or product deliveries that you've made and see where you've been successful. And maybe there's a particular, the data might tell you there's a particular location or area that you might want to investigate deeper. Do your research and seek help from organizations like Thames Valley Chamber, who can help support you with looking at target markets and perhaps some of their knowledge or other organizations in their membership that might be able to support you. And then check if certain trade rules or requirements in a particular country will support your business model and not be too complex. That particularly applies if you're starting out exporting. You know, you want to make it's difficult enough, so you want to give yourself the best fighting chance and make sure that it's the best market for you to sort of test the water, if that's the case. If you're a mature business, then you will have learned and gained great experience over the various countries or perhaps languages that you've been exporting to, and you can utilize those for your continued export growth. So you've defined your export strategy. That's the hope, and you're very clear on where you're targeting. But then we need to think about, are you actually visible to these markets or these individuals on the internet? So have you considered, and perhaps you have or you haven't, but have you considered that not all countries use their top search engine as Google? There are many search engines out there. As a quick sort of diagram to show you where Google sort of hangs out in the main, but then you'll see Yahoo popping up and some other search engine names that perhaps you're aware of or perhaps not. So it's important for you to be able to understand, sorry, just go back to that slide. Important for you to understand then, if you're doing any kind of online presence, where the search might be important to focus on. And if it isn't in one of the countries that Google is top, you might want to look at some of the other search engines and understand what their needs are and how to ensure that you rank and that your search is working for your business in those countries. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. So you can review your online searches. That is know where they're coming from. Obviously on Google Analytics, that will tell you, but also using an incognito browser, you can have a look, and this will give you a more accurate understanding of where your searches are coming from, either for your company name or any keywords or key phrases. So the screen here shows, this is actually Chrome, shows you what the incognito icon looks like over on the right, and then you can search. For example, in this case, we're looking at Google in Germany, which might be a location for you, and you can set the language and the location, and then search for your various key term in the search bar in the middle, and then that will tell you straight away whether you're coming up near the top or whether you're not figuring at all, perhaps on page 2 or 3, dependent upon the type of work you've done in terms of search for that particular country. So this is just a way of overriding your settings in the computer, where it recognizes your IP detection of where you're located, etc. So this will give you a true reflection. So perhaps you've done that, perhaps you haven't, but it's a quite a useful tool to know about. So I've mentioned that Google is not the #1 search engine globally, but when it comes to individual countries, that's not always the case. So here's some stats to show you. So here's the stat for worldwide in terms of the search engines. And then I'm going to show you where the search engines are for China. So in the case of China, you'll see it's Baidu, and then is the #1. And then if we're to move over to Russia, you'll see that it's Yandex, not necessarily, although it's pretty much split between Yandex and Google, but you'll see that it's important that you have an understanding not only of your export strategy, but where you're selling to and what that might mean for your online presence in relationship to search. So when it comes to selling online, we look at and we focus on the importance of having your 3 international online marketing principles. We always start in this position when we're supporting companies, and we found that it's a good pathway to really have a look at the important focus that we should be having for a particular product or a location that we're focusing on. So first principle is people buy from people that they trust. I think this is fairly common knowledge. Secondly, that we need to put ourselves in our customers' shoes. We find a lot of people start their website journey or their online presence sort of telling people what they do, why they're so wonderful. But actually, the customer wants to know what it is you can do for them. So it's important to put yourself in their shoes. And the third principle, thinking global but acting local. And that will hopefully become clearer if it isn't already later on into the session. So the first one, people buy from people they trust. Well, when marketing online, we need to take into account both the people and the search engines. So I've mentioned there's more than one search engine. So we've got quite a few online customers, people, search engines, and we might have more than one search engine. So when it comes to Google, and I'll focus a lot on Google because it applies to most of the companies, certainly the companies online today, but most of the businesses that we're supporting. Google uses trust rank factor to rank its websites. The higher the ranking of your trust rank, the higher the ranking of your site. So this is one of the ways to support your search engine. And these trust factors include many things like the quality and number of backlinks, page rank, trust rank of the sites linking to you, the consistency of your site, so the consistency of message, continuing to talk about the same types of product or same types of keywords and phrases, the domain age, the fact that you do have a sitemap and it's updated on a timely basis, any privacy and legal policies, and that you have a clear and concise and easy understood about us page. So the search engines are in it for the long game, and they are your first actually and most important customer when it comes to online presence, and in particular your website. So they're the gateway to the people that need you, and their reputations are fiercely protected. So your website needs to earn its place, and you will know this already. This also relates to, of course, social media and any other kind of online presence. That it's a crowded market, and it's becoming more so. So you need to be able to prove your worth, prove your place, so that you come up in the search against the search terms that your customers or potential customers might be searching for, so that you have a potential opportunity for them to see your storefront. But when it comes to people, the first principle refers to whether your company's online presence, and specifically in this case, your website, is ensuring that your visitor can feel confident about you, confident about your company and what you're selling, and that you have a clear customer service approach. So when it comes to building trust on your website, what puts you off ultimately? What erodes your trust when you're looking at a website? Now, this is kind of a poll, but for today's session, it might be just a chance for you to think about what it is. Perhaps if you want to drop it in the chat, we can have a look at it. But if it's just something you want to keep to yourself, and I'll give some examples at the end. But quite important for us to be clear on why we might not trust a particular website. Because if we reflect on our own thoughts personally, then we can reflect that back in terms of our own website and online presence. So just a couple of minutes for you to think. So I'm going to just share with you the list. So these might be the one that you thought of might be in the list. This is a list collected over quite a long period of time. If yours isn't on the list, then drop it in the chat so that I can add that in for future sessions. I think something just came in the chat. Okay, yeah, somebody's just said out of date information or broken links. Yeah, that's definitely on the list. So clear calls to action, poor design, broken links, as mentioned by someone, unclear navigation, that the website's slow to load, it's not mobile friendly, so therefore not responsive if you're coming on a mobile device, lack of reviews and testimonials, misspellings and grammatical errors, the site isn't secure, particularly applies to e-commerce, so you don't have the HTTPS or the padlock showing on the URL there, and poor quality images, colloquialisms and jargon that you can't understand on a website, and websites that have old content. So these are the stats that we've collected over the years. Why are they important? Well, I suppose if you took nothing from today's session, you could have a look at your own website, or someone within your website company, do a health check on your website to see whether you are actually meeting all these criteria, because that's step one. If you have any of these actions taking place on your website, then potentially you are eroding the trust of people that are coming to visit your website. So action would be to ensure that your website reflects your capability and competence, and that you don't have any of these actions on there that can erode trust. So the second principle I mentioned was to put yourself in your customer's shoes. So this really means, are you clear on your customer profile? And it's quite interesting to note that many businesses that we work with find themselves perhaps moving away from customer profiles that they created when they started their business. And many times they're quite old, or they haven't been refreshed. And sadly, in some cases, we work with businesses that don't have them at all. So really important to have a customer profile. Everything you do online should and could flow from that customer profile. So it really means you're understanding who it is you're wanting to attract, what kind of customers are going to buy your product, the ones that you are targeting. This also helps you to show how much you care about your customers. And language is one of the ways, not only English language that makes sense to those customers, but also language in the context of the language that those potential customers might be speaking. So just some stats around that to put language in context. Out of the world's 7.5 or so billion inhabitants, only 7% speak English as a first language. And within that percentage, that 7%, most of these people aren't even native English. They're with only about 360 billion people speaking English as their first language. So definitely a case for internationalizing your online presence, to understand what language might mean to your targeted customers. So visitors to your website not only want to be able to trust you and understand what you're saying, but they also want to know what you can do for them. So that's where you put yourself in your customer's shoes. Research shows that you have less than 1.7 seconds. I think it's down now to 1.1. It keeps moving, but you've got limited amount of time to capture your visitor's attention. This can also change depending on the demographic. So we're finding that millennials much less time to capture them. Perhaps if it's somebody from an older demographic group, then you perhaps have got the 1.7 or more seconds, just because of their history of slow loading websites and slow internet from their past. So they're much more patient, perhaps. So you have a limited amount of time to capture attention. And when people come to your website, they find you, hopefully, and they come to check you out, they normally have two key questions. Is this page relevant for what I've got? And hopefully it is, because your search has meant that you've directed the right people to come and find your website and then click onto the link. So you're just confirming that your search confirms what you're actually doing and selling. And then the second thing they're looking for is this trust piece. Do I trust this site? Am I going to go further because I have a level of trust, or am I going to bounce off because it's not the site for me, or there's something on there that just doesn't make me feel very comfortable? So what does your website show to your visitors? Do you have what they want? Are you showing it in the right way? And then the third principle that I shared was thinking global, yes, think global, act local. So global competition demands that your website's properly localized in order to succeed internationally and to come up in search, and to be able to compete on a local level, perhaps with some local competitors that you might have. So successful international businesses understand that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work when delivering products across multiple and different markets. And creating goodwill and establishing credibility with local markets is critical if you want to prosper. And prosper at the end of the day means sales. So localization is where a business actively seeks to differentiate its global products and communicates these to different individual markets and regions by embracing and accommodating the differences. So done correctly, this leads to improved results and return on investment, awareness and engagement. So does your website have localized content, and does it cater to the needs of your individual international customers by location or language? So I suppose ultimately, are you easy to find and do business with? So we've got the online principles, we've applied those, and now we do need to make sure that your customers can find you online. How can you ensure that you engage with, they engage with your online content, your offer, and your call to business, your call to action, and potentially some form of sales? So perhaps you're not sure. Well, here's an international web strategy checklist that you can take away with some options of how to ensure that your web strategy meets the needs of internationalization. So the first thing is to have an international domain strategy. I'm going to have another a page coming up that will tell you what that means. Do you have international sections on your website? Do you have perhaps country-specific pages or language-specific pages? And do you have local country domains, codes, and local content and local language content in your website? Some of the indicators that you have a website strategy. Now, we'll deep dive on some of these later, but these are just a good sort of checklist for you to think, oh, yes, okay, I don't have any of these, or perhaps you have some of these that you're applying. So it would be best practice if you're targeting a specific country to think about how your strategy of your website is going to work. And as mentioned before, one of the starting points would be with your international domain strategy. So here's a quick checklist of what that might look like. So a lot of companies that are based in the UK sometimes start with a country code top level domain. So, if you're going international, there's many reasons, and they will be touched on later, many reasons why it's important to perhaps think about starting with a generic top level domain like a .com. The importance of perhaps reserving other generic names that might make sense for your company. Certainly, if you're looking to localize into particular countries, going the country route through country domains. And if you're looking to localize then and locally host and do direct competition against another competitor within a country, then you might look at a country code domain that is locally hosted. And finally, internationalized domain names that are available as well. So important to make sure that you have a clear international domain strategy and your own checklist that makes sense for your company. And here's just a quick visual to help you understand what the journey might look like. So I've explained a little bit about some companies starting with a UK website that's on a .co.uk with UK content. It's optimized for UK English, perhaps. And then step 2 might be to start thinking global by adding international pages and an international section perhaps on your website, and perhaps looking to optimize into international or global English, which I do touch on in a short while in more depth. And then you might take the jump straight to acting locally. That is having local websites with local country or language pages hosted on a local domain with local content and links. And some of the other things you need to keep in mind are whether you have a local returns policy for the different locations, customer service that applies to these locations, technical support, and what that means for your social media as well, in terms of perhaps driving traffic to your website, or perhaps even having sales from social media directly. So as I say, some companies work through the pathway, some jump straight from the start to acting locally. And some have different strategies for different countries and languages that feed into parts of this growth that you can take. So I thought it might be good to give some examples of what that looks like, because sometimes people, they read that content and they're like, oh, I don't really know how that applies practically. So I've just shared here some imagery that perhaps helps you to understand what that means in terms of a website. So Oxford Brookes have an international section for their international students. So this is what it might look like. And behind that would be all the international content on the drop-down menu. So that's one starting route you might want to take if you're starting your international journey. You could look at a directory structure, and that might look like, in this case, offyour.com, a German page or pages with a /de, in this case for Germany, and also country flag navigation, where you can navigate to different countries through the drop-down flag menu, which is represented there on the right. So that's one way to further your internationalization. Or you might go the subdomain route. In the case of Duolingo, they've gone the subdomain by country. So you'll see here the fr.duolingo.com. So that's what that structure looks like. And they've got their drop-down menu on the right-hand side to show that this is a language site. So that's also a route you can take. Language, if you're going language route, then important not to use flags, because, you know, for example, Spanish, not just for Spain. So if you use a Spanish flag, you're going to be alienating more than 50% of the Spanish speaking population in the world. So certainly if you're going language route, to use the language drop down menu, and to always keep in mind that when using language that you need to translate the language. So if not to say sort of French, for example, to say française, which is shown here in this example from Melbourne, the Melbourne holiday promotion site. Then it's also the case that you perhaps want to look at having multiple sites. And I think the old Airbnb, they've gone a new route, but this is still quite a good example. Airbnb showing how they utilize the same footprint, so the same imagery, the same layout, the same construction, just with updated content. So the UK site being the first one I've shown, and then the second site showing, I believe it's the German site, showing that it pretty much looks the same, but definitely is a different language there. And then also there's a possibility that you can use the language and region section, where people can choose a language and region, because it's not always the case that the person, if you're using IP detection, it's not always the case that where the person is actually viewing is necessarily the language or the country that they want to connect with you or buy from you. And again, British Airways have quite a very mature website in terms of language and location. So you've got the possibility to choose country or region and language from their websites. So of course, when you're starting out, you're not going to get to those kinds of depth and that kind of expenditure and that kind of complexity, but it's really just to show you the different pathways that you can take. If you're a growing business, you might start in one way, but it's about giving yourselves the opportunity to grow as you perhaps add more countries or perhaps languages to your export strategy. So in addition to developing your international ideal client profile, which is really important, that feeds all the information for your online presence, it's also imperative that you identify your keywords and key phrases so that you can include these in your website content, to support your SEO. And here's just a number of ways that you can do keywords research. If you haven't done it already, or you're thinking of moving into a new location, or got a new product out there, or a new country or language you're focusing on, then you might want to revisit the keyword research for that particular client profile or profiles. And here's some of the ways that you can do that. Some of them free, some of them, a lot of them on here that I've listed are free. There's also paid routes that you can take, where there are paid specialists that will do keyword research for you. But really important, it's really the bedrock of any online presence, that you're utilizing the right keywords so that you can be found, and that when you're found, that you're talking the right language in the broader sense to these customers or potential customers. And then making sure that when you've got all those wonderful keywords and key phrases, that you utilize them in the right locations, particularly on your website. And here's some of the places that you should use them, but not excluding, of course, social media. Really important that you're having the same keyword phrases, keywords and key phrases within any kind of social media activity that might be driving traffic to your website or otherwise. You know, here's a good list if you are doing some keyword research, just as a refresher, or perhaps you're starting out and this might be a good pathway to start with for you. And then always remembering to focus on calls to action. And there's so many. Don't have them all on the same page or in the same location. You know, choose your battles, and this would be part of your customer profile as well, because your customer profile should inform, through your research of your customers and potential customers, which call to action works for them in a different location. Whether social media might be one thing, whether on certain parts of your websites it might be other things. But really important, you know, customers want to know what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, you'll find that they'll come, look around, yeah, everything's great, and then they'll perhaps drop out, not doing anything. Calls to actions. You know, what are we looking to do? We're looking to either sell something. If it's an e-commerce site, we want them to go to the cart and buy, or if it's not an e-commerce site, we want them to engage. We at minimum want to know who they are, so we want to capture their details in some form or another, so that we can either communicate with them in the future, perhaps sell them offers, perhaps sell them more information, send them more information about our products. So when we've got all these wonderful keywords and we're being found on the website, we also need to keep in mind our language and our manners. So don't be lost for words in international markets, is what we say. English in the US, there are 4,000 words in US English that means something different. So, you know, that's maybe one of the highlights you might want to think about if your focus is on English language speaking countries, and you think that it's kind of okay, we'll go into the US market, but we're speaking English on our website, so that will be accepted. Just keep in mind that some of the language is different, and what kind of levels of trust are you building, and how is that being received by your particular customers. In some cases, it might be part of your sales tactic. You might be promoting that you're a British company, and that might be part of the sale. But in other cases, it might really work against you in that particular marketplace. So important, if you're looking to go the language route and you're thinking to translate content, then we would suggest what we call transcreation. So that's writing copy in the language, as opposed to taking a page of English language, asking a company or somebody in your company to translate, actually taking that content and writing it for that country or that particular location in the language, because it's completely different. If you've ever taken a piece of text, you translated it to English using Google translation tool, and then back again, you'll see you end up with a lot of a grammar that doesn't make sense, and you know, it puts you off. It erodes trust. So really important. And you can start slowly. You might want to, if you're thinking of going the language route, you might want to start just with one page. just for a particular language, just to test how that works for you. So there is a case for language. And again, I may be preaching to the converted, but here are the top languages in terms of millions of users. So you'll see that, English will get you so far, but in some of the markets, you really need to be paying attention perhaps to other languages. And also, in case of language, it's important to note that you could take a first step by utilizing, and I mentioned it earlier in the website strategy pathway, you may look to utilize as a step one, international or global English. You can Google that on search terms and it'll tell you a bit more, but here's just some 7 quick key changes that you might make to your English content if you're internationalizing the English on your website. So reduce the volume, make it easier so there's less to read, keep the sentences short, simplify the language. So staff, not human resources, if that makes sense for your particular customer profile. Avoid jargons, acronyms, insider talk. It's always good to show a visual. It cuts out a lot of language and a lot of content if you can show a visual, whether that be a static picture, image, or video. Use bullet points and underline things and use bolds just to highlight keywords to make it easier to read. And don't make assumptions. Get someone to check over your content of a particular type of profile that you're trying to attract. So we say a picture speaks 1,000 words. I referred to that earlier. So whilst ensuring that images that you use are culturally sensitive for the different audiences, also be aware that not all countries will have high-speed internet access, which means that flash or animations and bandwidth sapping graphics, excuse me, that's difficult, may be an issue to load. So we now live in a world where ensuring your website loads quickly is absolutely imperative. So here's a good example from Nescafe. This is their UK site, so this works well culturally in the UK. That image is perfectly acceptable. Emotionally selling coffee and the experience of coffee. Coffee means love, I think, is the message they're sending here. But then when we go on to the China site, we'll see that that type of emotion is removed. It's more of an image around, I think that's coffee being dropped into a cup or some kind of device. With the language obviously written there in Chinese at the bottom, and then the imagery for the Arabic site. Yeah, I thought this is quite clever. Always good to go with emojis. If in doubt, go with an emoji that's culturally sensitive, and then you're not going to alienate any of the population that you might be wanting to attract. So finally, to ensure that you have all these ideas and research, make sure you put them in an action plan. Otherwise, as we know, no action plan, nothing happens. So if you've taken some nuggets from today's session, put them into an action plan. That is to say, prioritize them, write them down, look at utilizing or going through them one chunk at a time so they don't become too onerous. Make sure you've allocated any budget or funding resources that you require. Determine any roles, whether it's an in-house activity, whether you're going to have to outsource or maybe bring in some temporary support and, student support, maybe a student doing a project, maybe connect with a local university to get some help. That helps your business, helps you with some input, and particularly a younger, perhaps insight of input, but also helps them in terms of gaining experience in the workplace and also helping them with their project as part of their course. And then finally, make sure that you always get feedback about what you're implementing just to make sure it's hitting the mark. So quick reminder, we're going to move on to perhaps answer some of your questions and pull the camera back on so that we can be more engaging perhaps. So key steps, just to recap, 6 key steps in this case. Number 1, ensure your website can be found. Yeah, pretty key, I'd say, and not always the case. If you do that test, you might find, oh my goodness, we're not even on page 1. Number 2, develop trust with both visitors and search engines and make sure you're clear on which search engines you should be paying attention to. Put yourself in your customer's shoes. Don't talk about you. Look at what it is they want from you. Think global, but act local. Mind your language and manners and always have a plan. So there was an offer for today's attendees, and that is an international digital health check. It is free. You're not going to be caught with any expenditure. I believe it would be a value. The companies that have gone through the free digital health check have found it valuable. So it'll be a benchmark website audit score. So you'll see where you score in terms of your website as it is today, and also 3 international website development tips. So if you want to engage in that, and I suggest that, you know, that's something that will be of benefit, then just connect with me either through LinkedIn. It'd be good to connect with you on LinkedIn anyway, see your progress, but also you could email me directly at the email here on the screen. So I'm just going to just go back, bring my video up, stop sharing, bring my video up. There we go. That's interesting. So we do have, I think, some questions, don't we, Anne?
Yes, Ian. So Ian, I think it goes back to the initial thing where you were looking at the percentage of various things around the world, and he was wondering whether is that percentage of the population, or if I'm reading that right, probably more important, total number of online people. So
yes, I think he's referring to saturation. There are, of course, there's so many stats out there. In fact, that stats counter is and some of the links are at the bottom of the pages on my presentation that might be useful if you're wanting to delve more into, perhaps you've got a particular market or a particular country or a particular language, you can delve into the stats and you can utilize some of those links that'll be on the presentation when you get them. But yes, saturation in the marketplace. So what you're trying to do, I think, in terms of understanding website visitors is the penetration within that marketplace. You know, is it worth you spending a lot of time and energy on online presence if there aren't many people? You know, if that's not the way to connect with them, then you might have, if that's a really big market for you, then you might need to think in other terms. We do tend to generalize today and say, you know, online presence is it's going to get everywhere and it's going to get, you know, touch all the points you want, but clearly it isn't, which is why it's important to do your customer profile research so that you are clear how many people are on the internet. Do those numbers make sense for me in terms of ROI and expenditure, perhaps on my online presence or my website? Or is it the case that that's a good market for me, but actually I'm not going to make much headway because the numbers are low, not many people are going to be using the internet to check me out, and maybe it's an offline activity, maybe it requires some other form of promotion, country visit, or another way, shop front, go old school perhaps, it works in some cases. So yes, really that's about understanding your export strategy, your route to market, and your customer profile. So yeah.
So you mentioned that the need for reviewing constantly the websites and changes, etc. You know, we know in terms of, you know, in the austerity period we're about to go in, what would you say should be the minimum? You know, obviously people aren't, maybe the organizations aren't so cash rich at the moment, or they might not have the people, because obviously people's a factor in every business at this point in time. How would you recommend the best, and how often they should just do that on an average?
Yeah, I think you need to choose your battles, definitely. I think my sort of initial answer to that would be, if you do have an online presence, if that is one of the routes to market, then it's important that you have updated content on a timely basis, and that everything is working on a timely basis. What I tend to find is that when people are starting their international journey or their website journey, they develop a website and they create social media accounts for all the social media, and then they do a blog, and they do a webinar, a newsletter, and they do all the social media profiles, and they've got their website, which perhaps is an e-commerce website. So the problem with that is, if you've got copious amounts of money and a team of staff, then perhaps you can handle that. But there comes there's a sort of a breaking point between when it brings value and when it doesn't. So I was working with a client the other day, and they did the same. They built their new website. They had all the social media icons on. They had a newsletter, etc., etc. They were going international. I was working with them on that. And they had total overwhelm because they don't have enough resource people and they don't have enough money to be able to do all the things. So I always bring it back to the customer profile. So particularly in today's difficult times with cutbacks, I think the first thing you do is you revisit your customer profile. If you don't have one, you create one. If you do have one, you just check that it's up to date. That will inform you where to spend your money. It might say the only place they check you out is on Instagram, or the only place they ever visit is the website. That will then inform where you're going to spend your time and your money. The other point I'd like to make is once you've got your customer profile or profiles, maybe you've got more than one. If you have other activities that you've been doing that are redundant, so this particular client had Pinterest and they hadn't used it for a year and a half. So my response to that would be remove Pinterest. Unless you go and you refer back to your client profile and Pinterest is the number one and you're completely missing a whole market. But the suggestion is if you haven't been using it for, posting very often for a year, then the suggestion is it wasn't doing anything for you, in which case it's worse to keep it on there without updated content. And it's worse not only from Pinterest point of view. So if someone finds you on Pinterest, they think that you've gone out of business. But more importantly, it doesn't help you with search. I'm not going to say it works against you, but if people are really checking you out, and people do check out companies that they're going to spend money with, particularly if they're spending a lot of money. Some of you on today's call, your products aren't, they're not £1 a piece. So, there's a fair amount of expenditure. So people are going to be checking you out. And if they check you out and you erode their trust, then you're potentially losing them in the part of the sales process, the touch points. So I would say less is more. Go back to your client profile, choose your battles with your online presence, do one channel well. If that's all you can afford, just do that one and do it well. And in terms of timing, that's a tough one, Anne, because that again feeds, it's not a one size fits all. It is dependent upon your client profile. So if you truly have done the research on your client profile and your client inside and out, and you've populated your client profile or avatar with all the various pieces of information, you'll not only know the keywords, you'll know the platforms where they hang out. So you'll be able to, that's where you'll be able to put your information, but you'll also know what time of the day they check you out. You'll know whether they're a morning person that checks out online activity or emails, or whether they're an evening person. Their demographic will tell you that their profile information that you will have gained. Now, if you're new and you haven't got a customer profile, and you haven't got any customers yet, or you're in a new market where you haven't got any customers, then of course that's not so easy. So you need to fast track. You need to make best assumptions. You need to perhaps find one customer and make best friends with them, offer them something for free and say, can I talk to you? I'd like to know more about why you bought from us. What keywords might you use? Where would you buy? Would you rather buy here or there? How does it work for you? And you can gather all that information. That can be your starting point. But at least start somewhere and have it populated on a document. I suggest it's good if it's electronic, because then it can be updated on a timely basis, as opposed to paper, which goes out of date and gets put in a file. But yeah, it all comes back to knowing your customer.
So obviously, another thing that we see, this is my question now, because from experience, I look at lots of international websites and lots of business. Sometimes maybe, let's say, lost in translation because they may not have used a particular, a specialist translator, or they may not have used. And sometimes, we know Google Translate, etc. They get better, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so Google Translate on a website, I'm going to be controversial and say it's a no. There's no ifs or buts. It's a no. when it comes to Google Translate, it is getting more and more mature, and AI is supporting that. And there is I've forgotten the name, I should have had it in my notes, but there is a new organization out there that's really making some serious headway with translation, automated translation, but it's not there yet. So it's a no because of what Anne said. You get loads of bloopers, and it erodes the trust, and people that won't take your business seriously. So can you use Google Translate though for other things? Yes, offline. If you've got customers communicating with you in a particular language, you want to get the essence of what they're saying, you can utilize offline Google Translate. It'll give you a really good stab. I mean, I have some stuff I do in Spain, and sometimes they send me information. I'm like, my Spanish is, I'm a beginner, so I put it in Google Translate, and then it gives me the gist of what they're trying to say. In terms of if you are going to utilize different languages, not UK English, but other languages on your website, you do need to follow a number of rules, criteria. One is you need to use someone that's got the skill. Now, it can be costly if you're doing lots and lots of pages, if you've got a big website, but you do need to use a skilled person. So there are a number of ways you can do that. Of course, you can go to a translation company. You might have some resource in-house. You might have, if you don't ask, you don't know. There might be somebody within your company, or they might know of someone. So that's a route. There's always the student language route. But you always need to have somebody that is experienced in your discipline, in your product type, and has experience of the language. Check whatever it is you're putting out there. So find your pathway. It's quite interesting to note that most companies, when they think about it initially, they go, "Oh, translation company, very expensive. We're not going to do it." But there is a pathway. There are step approaches you can take. Yes, eventually you're going to need some form of translation company because they're the experts and you get what you pay for. But there are other ways that you can start the process. You don't have to do the whole process. And you don't have to do it all at the same time. That's another thing we get is companies, they for some reason think we're going from English website, we're going to, let's say, a French website, we'll do the whole thing. No one says you have to do the whole thing. You have to do the pieces that are important to your customer profile. Then you have to lead that customer profile on that journey. So it might be one page or it might be 2 pages, but it doesn't have to be the whole thing. So that feeds into navigation of your website, really. International navigation for different countries or different languages might be different on your website. For some, it might go to, yeah.
Yeah. I think what happens is obviously things, I mean, you guys, I know a lot of you are in the marketing, etc. I mean, as a layman that's not in marketing, I can tell you the technical stuff about trade, but marketing, I can do the basics. Everything changes, everything, there's constant new program, but there's new platforms, there's different ways, websites go through phases, etc. And it is difficult to keep up, it's difficult to, so utilizing, having that profile and utilizing the most appropriate part for you and your business, I would agree is fundamental, because there's nothing more than damage to reputation if somebody that's out of date, you've got it on, you might have it on all your literature, some still have literature nowadays, so you might have it on literature, and if it's not used, what's the point, sort of thing. So it is, for me, the fast pace of technology is difficult, I think, for some businesses to keep up as what's hot, what's not, what's hot in websites, what's not hot on websites now. Obviously it's that more visual and video and stuff like that, isn't it now?
Yeah, I think it's what's hot for your customer.
Yeah.
It's what's hot for your customer, because there are customers that I mean, and again, what your product is and what sector you're in. You might be total cutting edge, in which case, there's a suggestion there, should your online presence be more cutting edge, or not? It keeps coming back to who the customers are and what their preferences are, and where they're hanging out, and what they're doing. The other thing that I sort of should mention is that you need to be clear on what it is you want your website to do. That sounds so simple. But actually, sometimes you ask people and they say, well, we have to have a website, don't we? Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, maybe. In today's world, yes, you have to, because it's your shop front. So yes, I think general answer to that would be perhaps a yes. But you need to know what it is you want it to do for you. Is it just a shop front? Is it a store? Is it an e-commerce store? Is it an education website? Is it a website where you're promoting something, or is it a website where you're wanting to gather information to feed into the product? There are so many different reasons for a website. You might have more than one reason as well, but that is also part of your, it's driven, I would suggest, from your customer profile. Because if what you're trying to do is sell a product, which hopefully that's what you're all trying to do, is sell your products, that you know, you need customers to buy them to be able to sell them. So therefore you have certain kinds of customers that want to buy them. So therefore it's really important that you understand who those customers are, and then they drive that information. They'll inform through how they want to connect with you and buy your product. They will inform you, that will inform how your what your website should do, whether it should be an e-commerce site, whether it should be an information site, an education site, or maybe a piece is education and a piece is something else. So yeah, all comes back to customer profile. Even your export strategy, without a customer profile, it's kind of redundant in some
Fantastic. Fantastic. As I said, I never fail to, you know, learn something new every time. Excuse me.
Oh, Anne, dearie me, that's difficult. So we had Ian, Julian, Priscilla, and Zoe. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's session. Hopefully you've gathered some you've gathered some tips or some nuggets to take away. We like to call them quick wins, or maybe some that are more longer term. And yeah, do connect with me. I'd love to connect with you, and do take up the offer, because it's worth your while as a member of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. Anne, over to you.
I would say yes. Please do take up that offer, because as a chamber customer, your member, you are entitled to that free offer, and you'll get those tips and tricks from Claire, and definitely worth it. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I quite like the smaller sessions, because we can look quite at the companies in advance and see what sort of level that they're at. So much appreciated, and the thanks are already coming in. So have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully see you on something else soon. Take care.
Yes, thanks for joining us, and well done. Your websites, there's some great stuff. I was very impressed, so well done.
Thank you.
Bye.